We have now live pictures from Geneva set on the door to Air Force One, where we are expecting President Trump to appear and step down the stairs to the tarmac as he arrives in Geneva for the G7 summit with other major leaders and allies from Europe. Of course, hanging over all of this is not just the war with Iran and this newly announced deal or framework memorandum of understanding that has been released, but also the war in Ukraine, which continues to rage on.
That's right. CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes is there because Nancy, if you can hear me, the president is arriving to what the White House says what the White House says is good news. They have a memo of understanding with Iran. It's been 100 days plus in the making. However, there are key questions, as you just told us, as to what's really in the text. What type of welcome might the president receive here momentarily?
He is going to get a lot of relief, frankly, from the European leaders who are gathered here. They already put out a statement, the leaders of the UK, Germany, France, and Italy, basically saying, great, let's get the Strait of Hormuz reopened as soon as possible. We are pledging to help. And then, of course, let's go on to constrain Iran's nuclear program. But essentially, what they really want to see, Errol, is the Strait of Hormuz reopened, commercial shipping resume, because they get so much of their oil from the Persian Gulf that not only have they had to deal with rising prices of oil, rising prices of fuel, but in some cases, even shortages of fuel, which has been a big concern. You've seen airlines here in Europe cutting flights and conserving fuel. And so they are, glad to sort of take this as a win, extend an olive branch to President Trump, even though they have been more critical in the past about this war, saying that they didn't see the strategy, didn't understand it, weren't consulted. Really, what they want to do right now is figure out how to get the Strait reopened, flowing smoothly again as quickly as possible.
And you bring up such an important point about the history between the president and our allies in Europe as it pertains to this war. They were very much against it. They didn't want to be pulled in, even though the president was literally asking them to get involved, especially in terms of defending the Strait. What do you think will be the vibe, for lack of a better term, at the summit now that this deal has been announced? What will be the shift?
Well, I think that the Iran war will be a big topic of conversation, and particularly constructive ways that these European nations can get involved in getting the Strait reopened. But when it comes to a whole host of issues, Adriana, whether it is tariffs, AI, China, they are going to look for constructive ways to work with this president. They are not eager to get into a fight, even though there are a number of issues where they don't necessarily see eye to eye. And that is because President Trump has clashed with these leaders at G7 summits before. It happened just last year, and he ended up leaving the summit a day early. He said he had to monitor events involving Israel and the Gaza Strip. But there are a number of recent summits that he's basically kind of headed out early, and they're very eager to prevent that this time. So they've basically said they don't want to get into really sensitive topics, to the point where they took climate off the agenda entirely.
Wow. Because
they know that that's an area that they are unlikely to see eye to eye with this president. And to go a step further, Adriana, the leader of France, Emmanuel Macron, who is the host of this year's G7 summit, has actually planned a very elaborate private dinner between himself and President Trump at the end of this summit in Versailles, at that glittering palace in the Hall of Mirrors, in essence, just to make sure that President Trump sticks around and doesn't decide to skip out early, because, if there's one thing that the president enjoys, it is to be wined and dined in the home of royalty, and they are aware of that here in France, and that's why they have planned that lavish dinner right at the end of the summit, even though they're all going to have to get on a plane and head there, because Versailles is not in the backyard of Geneva, Switzerland. It's about an hour flight away.
But smartly, it appeals to the president's interior decor taste.
That is true. He likes gold-plated everything. And if there's one thing President Trump loves, it's flattery. Nancy, just to let our viewers know, if you're just joining us, we're standing by as President Trump, as we see now, is exiting Air Force One there in Geneva, Switzerland, just past 4 p.m. He's going to be meeting with world leaders and touting his new framework agreement with Iran, each side sharing publicly different aspects of the framework. It is said to be signed officially come Friday. You've got some dignitaries there on the tarmac welcoming the President of the United States. This G7 summit being hosted by Emmanuel Macron, as our Nancy Cordes just said. He's going to great lengths to keep the U.S. president there and as happy as possible in order to solidify as many multinational agreements as possible. Nancy, talk to us more about how the French president will try to keep the U.S. president happy and how this is a key aspect of diplomacy that Europeans have learned after many years of working with the U.S. leader.
Well, they know that flattery is always a good way to go. They know that talking about issues that are of great interest to this president are a great way to go. So you are sure to hear lots of public offerings of help, vessels that they want to send to the Persian Gulf, equipment that they want to loan to this process to get the Strait of Hormuz reopened. And then beyond that, they want to talk about some of their shared challenges. So there will be conversations about issues that are, essentially safe. Issues like AI, for example, that all of these countries are concerned about. Issues like how to deal with Chinese aggression. These are concerns that they all share. One area where things could get a little rocky has to do with Ukraine. President Trump has kind of gone back and forth when it comes to Ukraine and whether he thinks that Ukraine has the cards, as he put it, or does not. And actually, the leader of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, has been invited here to Lake Geneva to meet with the G7 leaders. Ukraine is obviously not part of the G7, but most of the G7 countries are European, and they care very much about the outcome of that war that has kind of moved to the back burner, at least for the President of the United States. So they are going to try to gently move it back to center stage and try to urge the president to remain very firmly on the side of the Ukrainians.
Yeah, and just to let our viewers know, we saw the president being welcomed by former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, as well as the president of the Swiss Confederation, the U.S. ambassador to Switzerland. And we just saw there the president leave Air Force One and board what now becomes Marine One as he heads to France, as Nancy laid out for that meeting. Nancy, you will have a busy number of days ahead. We always appreciate your coverage and context, and we'll connect again with you soon.